Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Radio Free Acton, the official podcast of the Acton Institute dedicated to the study of religion and liberty. I'm your host, Caroline Roberts. And on today's show, we're going to start out with a conversation between Drew McGinnis, editorial director and research fellow here at Acton, and Eric Hutchinson, associate professor of classics at Hillsdale College, and the translator of a book recently released in Acton's bookshop on the law of nature, written by Niels Hemmingsen. Drew and Eric will talk a bit more about the book and help define what natural law is. Then on Upstream, host Bruce Edward Walker speaks with Titus Teixeira, film critic and contributor to National Review, The Federalist, and more, about Netflix's new sci-fi film, Anon. If you're interested in any resources, articles, or books mentioned in today's episode, you can check them out in our show notes, posted every Wednesday at blog.acton.org.
You're listening to Radio Free Acton. My name is Drew McGinnis, and today I am speaking with Eric Hutchinson of Hillsdale College about the recent translation of Niels Hemmingsen's On the Law of Nature. And this book is published by CLP Academic, an imprint of the Acton Institute. And it's part of our series, Sources in Early Modern Economics, Ethics, and Law, that I am co-general editor of with Wim de Kock from the KU Leuven. And on the phone with us is Eric Hutchinson. Eric, hello, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. Eric, for our listeners, Eric is Associate Professor of Classics at Hillsdale College, and he's Director of the Collegiate Scholars Program there. And this book really is right in your wheelhouse of academic interests, am I right?
Yes, that's correct. Probably the major focus of my academic research has to do with the intersection of the classical world, the Greek and Roman worlds, and the Christian faith. And so the two primary periods that I'm interested in are late antiquity, especially the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries, and early modernity, the Reformation and post-Reformation periods, where a lot of the issues that you find in early Christian writers resurface again through the combination of the rise of humanism and Renaissance scholarship and a kind of increased vigor in reforming the articulation of the Christian faith. And
so Niels Hemmingsen is not a name that's familiar to a lot of people. He studied under Philip Melanchthon at the University of Wittenberg, right?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
And so this treatise, this is the first ever English translation of the treatise. Why'd you want to translate it? You just like translating, or why this treatise?
I do like translating. The way I came to this text in particular, though, is actually through a couple of people, one of whom is a colleague of yours at Acton. I don't even know how long it's been now, maybe 5 years ago. Jordan Baller sent me an email with a short description of the text and a link to a scan of it on Google Books and said, take a look at this. It sounds like the kind of thing you might be interested in. Let me know what you think. So I started going through the text, and lo and behold, it turned out I was in fact really interested in it. So I started trying to get myself up to speed to be able to do some serious work on it, which finally, culminated in the release of the book a few weeks ago.
And so it's of course, the title gives away the topic. It's on the law of nature.
Right.
So it's a treatise on the natural law. And so there's a lot of discussion on natural law in academic circles, philosophers, ethicists, etc. But for a lot of people, natural law is a foreign, strange concept, calls up ideas of like the law of gravity and such things.
Right.
So what does Hemmingsen say it is, and why is that important for us to kind of wrap our minds around?
Right. So when he's thinking of the law of nature, obviously, as you said, he's thinking about ethics, practical action in the particularly in domestic and civic spheres. So he's not really thinking about, the second law of thermodynamics or something. And so what he wants to do is set out an account of, first of all, of the fact that this thing that he calls the law of nature, that it exists, and second, how we know about it, and third, about how it sort of works in practical prudential terms. So the way that he defines it is as a kind of knowledge that is universally shared among mankind. So it's a knowledge. I guess what I would want to say is a knowledge of the law, what he calls the law of nature, at least in a kind of rudimentary form, is present in everyone by virtue of its having been imprinted on their minds by God. And so what this yields at its most basic is what he calls principles of knowing and acting. So some very basic first principles, such as honorable things should be pursued, shameful things should be avoided. And then he tries to show how that can be used to generate a variety of conclusions that are in agreement with what he takes to be the proper end of man, which is service to God and glorifying God.
Right. So you have in the treatise, then he discusses all those different spheres, the house,
Right.
the household, society, or the civil society, and even the church, correct, or the spiritual realm.
Right, the spiritual realm as well. So the kind of the classic three estates. He wants to show how the same principles are at work in all three of these spheres or estates, because all three of them are necessary components of human life, and given that the actor in all three of them is the same, that is man, the human being, the very basic principles on which they are founded and by which they operate are going to be the same in all of them.
I think one of the thrilling things for me, I thoroughly enjoyed the book and working through it, and one thing I thought was thrilling is his use of so many classical sources, and that could be maybe a barrier to some people as they open it, because there's a lot of Greek in here,
right?
Greek quotations. Thankfully, they're all translated, so that makes it accessible. But you have the typical writers like Plato and Aristotle and Cicero, but he's got all these other sources from the poets and Greek dramatists. And help us understand why is that? What does that have to do with natural law?
So I would say a couple of things. You're absolutely correct. He is quoting not just kind of what we might consider the usual suspects, Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, etc., but he's got a lot of more obscure writers, and particularly nowadays more obscure. There are probably a number of names of writers he quotes that will probably be unfamiliar to a lot of readers. So I've tried to provide little biographical notices for all of those, or as many of those as we have biographical notices for. So I said there are probably a couple of different things that he's up to. One of them is to demonstrate the long history of the kind of task that he has set for himself, and is therefore showing its really deep, anchoring in antiquity and the history of human thought. But another thing that I think he's doing is to say, look, this law of nature that I'm talking about really is universal. It's something that is grasped in some form by most human minds. Again, I mean, as he defines it, it's present in everyone just by nature. And so he, I think, would want to say, there's evidence of this. This is open to observation. We can see just by observing that this is something that people bear witness to, and so we can do that through the literature, which is one of the main things that he does. And so he says, look, this isn't just in philosophers who are kind of spending all of their time thinking about issues of ethics and the human mind and so on and so forth. But even in poets, right, it comes out, if you just read carefully, you see that even in poets and various other kinds of writers, rhetoricians, whatever, if you look closely, you'll see that the kinds of things that they're saying also bear witness to the existence of this law of nature, that they assume it and show that they too act as though it is a thing that really does exist. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And so it's he's, in a sense, he's trying to prove its universality, or at least illustrate it through a wide variety of genres and sources. And in the midst of that, he cannot avoid talking about the virtues. In fact, he doesn't try. He has an entire chapter, the longest chapter, that is on the cardinal virtues.
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. And this to me is one of the most interesting things about the treatise, and perhaps one of the things that will be most striking to a lot of modern readers. Hemmingson wants to give what he considers to be a conclusive case that there is no sort of rupture or disharmony between the truths of revelation and the truths that are discoverable by the process of reasoning and reflecting on nature. So right before the chapter that you mentioned, which is really quite long, there is a very short chapter on the Decalogue, or the Ten Commandments, where he gives you a bunch of syllogisms that are intended to show, look, the principles that are enshrined in the Ten Commandments are deducible by a process of reasoning. And then what he wants to do is say, and by the way, those are the same, the kinds of actions that are being commanded in the Decalogue are identical with, the ethical content of revealed ethics is identical with the ethical content of the virtues as they have usually been discussed. So justice, courage, temperance, prudence. There is a harmony between those things in their truest form, and it's not as though he says, well, everybody got all of these things right in absolutely all of their details in every instance before being clarified by revelation or what have you. But when properly understood, those four virtues are, and their various parts, so the kind of subordinate virtues that are subject to those four major categories, are in harmony with what we find, Scripture saying God has commanded people to do.
And I've benefited greatly from the book already as a sort of a reference work on even the terminology of the virtues. You mentioned that he goes through the four cardinal virtues, but he also has all these subparts of each virtue.
Right.
And just for example, under his discussion of justice, he talks about natural affection, gratitude, innocence, punishment, benevolence, liberality, friendship, and others. And he has the Greek term, and he's dealing with the classical sources and giving clear definitions. And so I just find it immensely helpful, just even as a reference, to go back and say, okay, what does that term mean, and what are some of the sources behind it? And he just does a great job, I think, of unfolding it. And I'm struck by, again, here's another instance of a Protestant who is very interested in the virtues in the early modern period, which today to a lot of people would seem strange, but it was not strange in his own day, right?
No, it wasn't strange at all. If you think about what he's doing from the kind of sort of classical two kingdoms perspective that you find in Luther and Melanchthon and lots of others, there is this temporal kingdom. The world still has its own affairs to tend to, even after the accomplishment of redemption, and redemption doesn't do away with the basic contours of the world, with principles that are necessary for having an ordered, harmonious social and civic life, and so on and so forth. So this kind of character education or inculcation of ethical teaching is really, really important in Protestant reforms to education. You find it all over the writings of Melanchthon and lots of others too. People still need to be trained in the virtues in order to be able to function properly in a well-ordered society.
Well, Eric, thank you so much. Again, this book is excellent. We could go on and talk even more. There's a great closing chapter on the conscience, which
right. Yes.
we could talk about that as well. But I think it's a great addition to not only the academic scholarship on Hemmingson and on natural law, but as I said, it's a great reference point for anybody interested in these topics. So thank you for joining us today. It's Eric Hutchinson. He's the Associate Professor of Classics at Hillsdale College, and he's the translator and editor of the new book by CLP Academic called On the Law of Nature, a Demonstrative Method by the Lutheran scholar Niels Hemmingson. Thanks for joining us, Eric.
Thank you very much for having me.
It might come as a surprise, but poverty rates in the developing world are dropping dramatically. In fact, economic growth in developing nations has far outpaced the growth of high-income countries. Not only the world has experienced a historic reduction in poverty over the last 25 years, but global income today is much more equal than at any time in the last 100 years. Join Acton on September 27 in Grand Rapids for a lively pub lecture on the good news about poverty alleviation. You can register at acton.org/events.
Last night when I was chasing her, that's where it starts. What I see changes. The stairs stretch. It's an optical illusion, which later disappears from my record. And it doesn't end there. At this moment, I'm seeing a train at the platform. A train that isn't there.
Placing a moving image in real time. Who can hack a human being?
Hello and welcome to Upstream. I'm your host, Bruce Edward Walker, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the future of technology, which is actually the present of technology, and we're going to talk about a Netflix film that's been out for quite some time, but it recently came across my radar because of an essay written for Catholic World Report by Titus Teixeira, my old friend, who is making his third appearance today on Upstream. It's called Netflix's Anon, Love in the Time of Total Surveillance. Hello, Titus. How are you today?
Hello, Bruce. Glad to be back. It seems like we're always talking about fairly grim sci-fi stories, and I think it's because the talent in storytelling is quite worried about our situation, how we get to the basics of human relationships with love and friendship in a time when we are living increasingly artificial lives, turning into ghosts of a digital kind, which is, of course, new to us. And so I suppose it's normal to be worried.
Right. Well, what prompted this essay was a movie called Anon, which is directed by Andrew Nichols. You call him one of the first-rate sci-fi writers in America, and he's responsible for Gattaca and The Truman Show. So what else can you tell us about Nichols and his worldview?
Andrew Nichols, very interested above all in the relationship between humans and technology, what kind of effects technology will have on us, and where are we going. The Truman Show, which was a big success, directed by Peter Weir, starring Tom Hanks at the top of his powers, was a movie about social construction and corporate control. Can we really think our way into a kind of nostalgic 50s paradise? Could we really, if we believed in the right sort of surveillance, in that case reality TV, could we really reconstruct our society to fit those nostalgic ideas? And in that movie, Truman, the American everyman hero, manages to escape surveillance. And this already establishes this big theme for Andrew Nichols, how love is the opposition to technological control of life. This happens in Anon as well. Anon is a story of a near future where reality has been supplanted by technology, by supplementation. Everything is more and better in higher definition and with better recall. Our eyes are electric, our souls become electric. In Anon, that is to say, the world is barren up until digital technology overlays on the world information about other people, advertising, your dreams and fantasies, whatever you might want, whatever gets you out of the house, it's all added digitally. The world is otherwise barren. Surveillance itself changes in this new situation where you live at the mercy of the cloud because there's nothing you can hide anymore. Privacy has been repealed, not by tyranny or evil government action, but by popular demand, so to speak.
Like Blade Runner, it's very much a film noir in regard. We have kind of the hard-boiled detective who has new tools at his disposal.
Yes, you're right. It again replays this form of individualism where you get the stylishness of mid-century America, from suits to cars, and on the other hand, the kind of brutalist architecture and minimal modernist interior decoration that always signals this world is somehow too glamorous to be real and too barren to be inhabitable by human beings. So with Clive Owen in Anon, like with Blade Runner and Harrison Ford, you get a sense that there's a reason this guy is miserable. At some level, as a detective, he wanted to believe in his world, in doing justice, in defending order, but he's become disenchanted with it because it's just not human enough. It can't speak to his longings, and this gradually becomes obvious, as with Harrison Ford and Blade Runner, because he becomes vulnerable to love. As he has a past that haunts him, there's also this other possibility that something might speak to his heart, something out there beyond the limits of the law, a hacker played by Amanda Seyfried, who's a young, beautiful woman with something to hide. It's not clear what she has to hide, but she insists, in a way nobody does in this futuristic world, on hiding whatever it is that she chooses to. That is to say, in recreating her privacy. And so this agent of the law and order has to face the fact that you have to go beyond order and beyond surveillance if you're going to really know who this woman hacker is and what his relationship to her should be. And like in Blade Runner, he becomes deeply disenchanted with order because it is essentially lawless, he gradually finds. That is to say, from the point of view of the agents of order in Anon, anybody is expendable. You can sacrifice people who get in the way because they personally don't matter. When once you digitize humanity, you can figure out which ones matter and which ones don't.
Right. You write in your column, the obedience that makes order possible is not, but every man is replaceable, which reminds me of the old eggs omelets dynamic,
Yeah.
where you have to break many eggs to make a decent omelet, and that's where humanity seems to be headed. And again, there's not a whole lot you can do in public today that isn't part of the public domain.
Yes, that's right. And it seems like we're going ever more in that direction because whatever the world was like before, we somehow don't think it's good enough. We want to add something to life. We want to discover something more worthwhile going digital, and we seem to be willing to pay quite a price. It's not just celebrities who all of a sudden find themselves under accusations, or of course any number of other people who find their privacy violated, but it's the sort of stuff that you see in Andrew Nichols' movie. Loneliness is going to look different in a digital world because you don't even have prior human relationships that really bind you. So you don't exactly feel lost, you simply feel anchorless. It's not that you grew up in the normal world and then leaped into digital, lured by the attraction. It's that in the future, nobody will be born in the normal world. Nobody will come out of the associations of private life. You have to somehow break through and go beyond that if you're going to find out who a certain person really is. And that would, of course, mean to see, first of all, that they're not reducible to a set of data, that there's something irreducible or mysterious about a person. Is also about what attracts one to another.
Right. And before we go any further, I would like to add for listeners that this is definitely an R-rated film. So there might be objectionable material for some of our listening audience. But let's go back to the philosophical implications of such an ordered world. And, Russell Kirk wrote about ordered liberty, but both of those words are operative in that one needs liberty as well as order. The whole film prompts the question, is a human individual good because they are forced to be good rather than make the personal choice to be good?
Yeah, the Russell Kirk is a good way to think about this precisely because in Anon, you see how technology utterly separates order and liberty. Liberty ends up looking like nothing so much as chaos, and order instead is completely enforced. As you say, people are forced to be good if they're to be good at all. Or, of course, to go back to T.S. Eliot, we're looking to build systems that are so perfect that no one will have to be good. That is to say, the human powers, the striving to secure what's good for ourselves and for others, and to live together with others in communities where we have some kind of common agreement on what the good is and how to pursue it. All this striving, all this difficulty, all this drama of human life is cancelled by a certain technological arrangement where it doesn't really matter what any human being is capable or is not capable of doing. The only question is what powers in the system control human action, at least at the margins. That is to say, when somebody steps over the boundaries, when somebody does something dangerous. So in a non-human action has been reduced to policing crime because everything else is under control. It's only when a criminal steps beyond the limits of order that some policeman has to chase after him. Otherwise, life has been reduced to such an extent that one of the shocking ideas in the film is that the victims whose murder Clive Owen investigates are utterly confused in their last moments because they see themselves from the point of view of their murderer. In order to wipe out any evidence, the murderer hijacks their eyes and shows them the world through the murderer's eyes. And for all of a sudden, these people have to look at themselves, therefore, in their utter pure vulnerability and lack of orientation in the world. All of a sudden they realize that they have been propped up by an incredibly artificial, incredibly powerful system without which they are utterly powerless. They cannot even move properly anymore.
That's a terrific point. And, let's close out with the final paragraph of your essay, and where you discuss the title of the film. It's actually a pun. And so please.
Yes, Anon, of course, is short for anonymous. In our modern world, we always shorten things. And anonymity here is tied up with freedom because it means not being able to be detected or being able to hide yourself from someone who wants to know you. This doesn't mean that you are simply unknowable or unintelligible. It means that you are knowable if you let yourself be known. That is a free gift. Knowledge of oneself. But Anon, of course, is also an old English word from the Elizabethan age that means soon. And this is the logic of modernity. We do everything we do because we want things to work faster. We want them now. We want them right now. This is what the word modern means. It's an Italian adverb, a Latin word that means now. just now, right now. This is why when we talk about what's modern, it might be something from 1500 or something from 1900 or something from 2 years ago. Modernity always shifts forward with us. We can never have enough of it because we always want it now. That is to say, the logic of modernity is the logic of instantaneity. The desire to objectify ourselves as quickly as possible, from desire to action, from image to reality, and to get in this way the satisfaction not just of a thing we want, but the satisfaction that we are real, that we can have consequences in this world, that we can affect things, we can make things be different, like when you order stuff on Amazon and it's delivered within hours to you. Now, right now, just now, you can get what you want now, and you believe you are real for that reason, that you can instantiate yourself through your desires, you can objectify your will. And this, of course, doesn't leave any time for reflection. Reflection instead is not a now, a right now, soonest. It's, in a sense, it's when it's too late. You have to have things to think about, and often that means loss or failure. It means suffering. It means having tried to get something that you thought was worthwhile and failing at it and trying to live with the consequences. And that, of course, requires a very different understanding of time and a far less willful attitude to the world in which we live and to other people.
Well, terrific. That's about all we have time for today. Titus Teixeira, I want to thank you for once again joining us and enlightening us with your terrific insights that are conveyed through some very terrific writing over a wide swath of publications online and in print. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks a lot, Bruce. It's always a pleasure talking with you, and it's always a pleasure telling people about Andrew Nichols. Go watch Gattaca. All the best.
Yes, one of my favorite. Thank you. You're talking about Netflix's film Anon, starring Clive Owen and Amanda Seyfried, and directed by Andrew Nichols. And for Upstream this week, I'm your host, Bruce Edward Walker. I'd like to thank my producer, Caroline Roberts, my executive producer, John Caritas, and we'll talk to you again next week.
And with that, we've come to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening today. Let your friends know that they can listen to Radio Free Acton on Spotify or their favorite podcast app. If you want to reach our podcast team here at Acton, you can email us at rfa@acton.org or leave us a message at 888-705-4180. If you like what you hear on Radio Free Acton, don't forget to give us a rating on iTunes. This episode is produced by Caroline Roberts and edited by Nathan Moore.